Every monster in history once believed they were doing the right thing. Evil doesn't storm in wearing horns. It arrives disguised as duty, loyalty, or silence. And the most terrifying part, under the right circumstances, any one of us could become its instrument. Evil has always fascinated and terrified us. We imagine it as something distant, something alien, embodied by villains, tyrants, or monsters we could never relate to. But the unsettling truth is that evil doesn't come from elsewhere. It comes from within. The same human heart that's capable of love, compassion, and sacrifice is also capable of cruelty, hatred, and destruction. The line between good and evil isn't carved in stone. It's fragile, shifting, and often invisible until it's already been crossed. Most people believe they're good. They live by certain morals, follow rules, and think they'd never hurt anyone intentionally. But goodness isn't a fixed state. It's a choice we must renew every single day. And under the right pressures, those choices can falter. A person who sees themselves as decent can be led, step by step, into doing things that once would have horrified them. That's how ordinary individuals have found themselves committing atrocities, not out of pure hatred, but out of fear, obedience, or the desire to belong. Psychology shows that we all carry the seeds of both light and darkness. Our minds are shaped by survival instincts, older than civilization itself. When threatened, humiliated, or pushed to the edge, even the kindest person can become something unrecognizable. Anger, envy, and fear, emotions we all experience, can twist into something destructive when left unchecked. And what's frightening is how easily our moral compass can be distorted by the world around us. When everyone else seems to accept something wrong, when authority justifies it, when silence feels safer than truth, we begin to drift. Evil doesn't announce itself. It starts subtly, with excuses, small lies, little compromises. It asks for obedience in the name of order, or cruelty in the name of justice. It seduces with comfort, conformity, and belonging. People often don't realize when they've crossed over, because they still believe they're doing what's right. History is filled with examples of ordinary men and women who became instruments of horror while thinking they were protecting their country, following God, or just doing their job. It's easy to look at others and condemn, to believe we'd never do the same. But that illusion of moral superiority is dangerous. The moment we think we're immune to evil, we become blind to our own potential for it. Real goodness isn't about denying our darker impulses. It's about recognizing them. It's about knowing that we're capable of harm, and consciously choosing not to act on it. True morality requires humility, the awareness that the battle between good and evil isn't out there in the world. It's happening inside every human being, every single day. The psychologist Carl Jung once said that, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. That means we can't fight what we refuse to see. We can't claim to be good if we've never confronted the darkness within us. Only by acknowledging that capacity can we understand it, control it, and prevent it from controlling us. The line between good and evil isn't drawn between people. It runs through every human heart, and the strength of a person isn't measured by how pure they are, but by how honestly they face the shadows within themselves. We like to believe that character defines destiny, that good people do good things, and bad people do bad things. But psychology tells a far more unsettling story. Often it's not who we are that determines our actions, but the situations we find ourselves in. The power of circumstances, authority, and environment can reshape human behavior in ways that defy logic and morality. The truth is, context can turn kindness into cruelty, and ordinary people into agents of harm. Think of the Stanford prison experiment. A group of college students, smart, ordinary young men, were randomly assigned roles of guards and prisoners in a mock prison. Within days, the guards began humiliating, abusing, and psychologically tormenting the prisoners. No one told them to be cruel. They simply fell into the role the situation demanded. When given power, they began to act as they believed power behaves. What's chilling isn't that they were bad people. it's that they were us. Under the right circumstances, their transformation could be anyone's. Then there's the Milgram experiment. Volunteers were told to deliver electric shocks to another person for giving wrong answers to questions. They could hear screams, pleas for mercy, even silence. But when the man in the white lab coat calmly said, "The experiment requires you to continue," most of them did. They kept pressing the button, believing they were causing pain, even death. Not because they wanted to, but because an authority figure told them to. The lesson is deeply uncomfortable. Obedience can override conscience. The desire to please, to follow, to belong, can make us ignore the quiet voice inside that says this is wrong. When we look at the horrors of history, the concentration camps, genocides, wars and systemic injustices, it's tempting to imagine the perpetrators as monsters, but many of them were ordinary people who loved their families, paid their bills, and believed they were doing the right thing. They were swept up by ideology, fear, and authority. They didn't wake up one day and choose evil. They obeyed, they adapted, and they conformed to what was expected of them. The real danger lies in that tendency to follow the crowd, to silence doubt, to convince ourselves that responsibility belongs to someone else. This isn't just history. The same psychological forces operate in our daily lives. In workplaces, people stay silent about wrongdoing because they fear punishment or exclusion. In schools, students bully to fit in. Online, people dehumanize others behind screens, carried by the tide of group outrage. The setting changes, but the mechanism stays the same. When the social environment normalizes cruelty, conscience becomes the enemy. We underestimate how much power the situation has over us, because we want to feel in control. But the uncomfortable truth is that even strong moral people can falter when placed in systems that reward obedience and punish dissent. Evil doesn't always come from hatred. It often comes from compliance, and it thrives when people trade their moral judgment for the comfort of belonging or the illusion of safety. The most dangerous words in any society are, "I was just following orders." They represent the moment when morality is surrendered to authority, when responsibility is outsourced, and when the human spirit begins to decay. To resist that pull requires awareness, an active decision to think, to question, and to choose conscience over conformity. Situations have the power to shape us, but we also have the power to shape how we respond. The difference between good and evil isn't found in the uniform we wear or the rules we follow. It's found in whether we have the courage to say no when everything around us demands silence. Evil doesn't appear in a single explosive moment. It grows slowly, almost invisibly. It begins with tiny compromises, subtle rationalizations, and quiet justifications that seem harmless at first. No one wakes up one morning and decides to betray their values or harm another person. The descent begins in inches, not miles. It starts with one small decision that goes against our conscience, followed by another, and then another, until the distance between who we were and who we've become feels unbridgeable. This is how corruption takes root in the human mind. It's not dramatic or sudden. It's gradual, almost seductive. A person justifies a small lie because it avoids conflict. They ignore a wrong act because speaking up would be uncomfortable. They convince themselves that cutting corners just this once won't matter. Each act dulls the sting of guilt a little more, and over time, conscience becomes quieter. The inner voice that once shouted stop begins to whisper, it's fine. The terrifying part is how normal it all feels as it's happening. Psychologically, this process is called moral disengagement, the ability to distance ourselves from the consequences of our actions. We reframe cruelty as necessity, obedience as virtue, and selfishness as self-preservation. We tell ourselves stories that make wrongdoing acceptable. Everyone's doing it. It's not my fault, or it's for the greater good. Once that story takes hold, we stop seeing our actions for what they are. Evil doesn't require hatred. It only requires justification. History offers endless examples of this slow decay. Soldiers in wartime atrocities often began as disciplined, ordinary men. They didn't commit unspeakable acts on day one. They adapted to their environment, Step by step, each act of cruelty became easier than the last, until empathy disappeared entirely. Bureaucrats who facilitated injustice didn't see themselves as villains. They believed they were just doing their jobs. That's the most frightening part. When evil becomes procedural, it no longer feels like evil, it feels like routine. The same psychology operates in smaller, everyday ways. A person starts gossiping about someone they dislike, telling themselves it's harmless talk. Soon, they begin to enjoy it. Another person cheats a little on taxes, then more the next year. A manager overlooks unethical behavior because confronting it would cost them favor or comfort. Each moment of silence, each tiny art of compromise, creates a psychological distance between action and responsibility. The further we go down that road, the easier it becomes to keep walking. The corruption of the mind rarely feels like corruption at all. It feels like logic. It feels like doing what's necessary. That's what makes it so insidious. It disguises itself as reason. We convince ourselves that morality is flexible, that the ends justify the means, and that our actions don't truly define us. But they do. Every decision we make shapes the kind of person we become. Evil doesn't demand grand gestures. It only needs small acts of blindness repeated often enough to become habit. To resist that slow erosion requires self-awareness and courage. The willingness to stop and question ourselves even when it's uncomfortable. It requires honesty to admit when we've begun to drift, to confront our own justifications before they harden into beliefs. The human mind is capable of astonishing compassion, but also frightening indifference. What determines the difference isn't what we feel, it's what we allow ourselves to ignore. The path to darkness is rarely a leap. It's a gentle slope. And by the time we realize how far we've fallen, it's often too late to see where the descent began. Understanding the psychology of evil isn't about condemning others. It's about recognizing how fragile goodness can be, and how easily we all can lose sight of it. The only real defense against the darkness of human nature is awareness. When we acknowledge that evil isn't an external force, but something that can emerge within us, we begin to gain the power to resist it. Ignorance and denial are the soil in which evil grows. Awareness and self-reflection are what prevent it from taking root. Most people imagine goodness as something automatic, something that doesn't require effort. But true morality is an active process. It demands vigilance, courage, and self-honesty. Being good isn't simply about having kind intentions. It's about making difficult choices, especially when those choices cost us something. It's easy to be moral when life is comfortable and everyone agrees with us. It's when doing what's right requires sacrifice, when the crowd turns away, when fear whispers that silence is safer. That's when our character is truly revealed. Psychologists have long known that evil flourishes in systems where individuals feel powerless or detached from responsibility. That's why awareness matters. When we see ourselves as separate from the problem, we stop feeling accountable for it. But the moment we realize that every moral failure, every injustice, every cruelty thrives because of ordinary people's silence, something changes. We begin to understand that goodness isn't passive. It's an act of resistance. It's the choice to speak when silence feels safer, to see when blindness feels easier, and to care when indifference feels more convenient. Carl Jung believed that confronting the shadow, the darker, hidden side of our personality, was essential to becoming a whole human being. Without that confrontation, we remain naive about our capacity for harm. We project evil outward, imagining it belongs to others, not us. But when we have the courage to look inward, to see the parts of ourselves capable of anger, envy, deceit, or cruelty, we don't become worse, we become freer. Because once we see those parts clearly, we can choose not to feed them. Awareness doesn't make us perfect. It makes us responsible. History has shown that moral awareness is the strongest defense against the corrupting influence of power and fear. The heroes we admire, the ones who stood up to tyranny, who protected others, who refused to obey unjust orders, weren't superhuman. They were people who had cultivated a deep sense of moral awareness. They understood that conscience is not a luxury, it's a duty. They had learned to listen to that small, quiet voice inside that says, "This is wrong," even when the entire world shouted the opposite. That voice exists within all of us, but it requires courage to keep it alive. To awaken the moral self is to accept that goodness is a practice, not a possession. It's not something we have, it's something we do, moment by moment, choice by choice. It's how we speak to others, how we use our influence, how we respond when confronted with injustice. It's the willingness to be uncomfortable in pursuit of what's right. True morality isn't about appearing good, it's about remaining human in a world that constantly tempts us to forget what that means. The most powerful form of resistance to evil is self-awareness, because when we see clearly, manipulation loses its grip, obedience loses its power, and fear loses its hold. Awareness turns morality into action, and compassion into strength. And in a world where darkness often hides behind ordinary faces, the greatest act of goodness is simply to stay awake. In the end, the battle between good and evil isn't fought in wars, or governments, or even history books. It's fought quietly, inside the human soul. Every thought, every choice, every silence, draws that invisible line between light and darkness. Evil doesn't need monsters to survive. It only needs good people who stop paying attention. So, look inward, question your comfort, listen to the voice that trembles but still whispers, "This is wrong," because the moment we stop asking what we're capable of, that's when we become capable of anything.